Buckeye fans are already checking the forecast for 3 weeks from now in Columbus. Of course, we witnessed what we did in Evanston, on to the shoe and Indiana. This is Buckeyes Live right here at the Voice of College Football. We come your way every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, so mark it down. Get back next week and bring a few friends with you. Tony Gerdeman's on the line from Buckeye Huddle, also his podcast Buckeye Weekly. Steve Hellwagon from Bucknuts 247 Sports as well. Guys, how we doing today?
I'm doing good. Well. I just want to caution, got folks here at the house installing a new furnace just in the nick of time as we're about to get our first blast of really cold weather, I think, here in Ohio coming up real soon. So got them at the house today doing that, but hopefully it won't interrupt our festivities too much right now.
I had a friend text a picture from Oregon today. Snow all over the place. I don't know how deep, but it was everywhere you could look. So it's coming at some point, but we've been pretty fortunate into mid-November. Yes, sir.
What's interesting, somebody after the World Series ended posted only 100 days till the pitchers and catchers report. And usually by mid-February, about my birthday's February the 13th, and I feel that if I can get to my birthday and survive until my birthday, that it's usually about the end of February, it starts to warm up a little bit here. So, and by warm up, I mean 40s and 50s as opposed to 30s every day. So, it gets a little warmer. And then by mid-March, we're usually, we have some 70-degree days sometimes in mid-March. So, it's November the 9th. We're not that far away.
There's something about
it. We're supposed to have 70 degrees tomorrow and like 74 the day after that, or 74 tomorrow, and it's going to be like 37 for the Indiana game. It's like you couldn't wait 2 days.
Bundle up.
To give us some, yeah.
Bundle
It'll be
up.
fun though.
Yeah, for some reason I can make it through November and December, leading into Christmas and New Year's. It just doesn't seem as cold. And then when it just sits in day after day after day after day in January and February. All right. Well, they say there's cold and then there's wind-aided cold. And I know that it wasn't cold, Tony, last weekend near Chicago. But Steve and I talked about this the other day. Mighty drab and dreary conditions there. How much of an impact did that have on the game? What do you take away from this game in regards to real concerns versus that was left in Illinois?
Well, we saw stuff in that game that we've never seen before. You see CJ Stroud completing like 38% of his passes, which has never happened, throwing for under 100 yards, which has never happened. So when you have these outliers that have never happened, throwing crazy passes 10 yards away from the player, from a receiver, when you see stuff like that, and you don't acknowledge that the wind played a large role in it, you're being dishonest. And there is stuff in that game. You see Ohio State lining up for a snap and the ball rolls away. I saw a first down marker go flying. I saw a sign, a wall advertisement come off of the wall and hit a photographer in the back of the end zone. Like, wasn't paying attention. Like, this is all just going on as the game is going on. And we rewatched the TV broadcast. And you see the start of the game where Ohio State's offense is just being blasted with rain in their face because it was a horizontal rain to start the game as well. So you got CJ Stroud like squinting as he's getting ready for the ball, and it was the opponent wasn't Northwestern. The opponent was the conditions, and so I know people are saying that Ohio State's using another excuse. And Ryan Day even on Tuesday was like, I don't want to get into detail about how difficult it was because it sounds like excuse making. You need to pick up a yard on 3rd and 1 regardless of what's going on. But when you look at everything that happened with that offense, and what Northwestern did, they threw the ball twice against the wind. Like, if you don't take these things into account when you are looking at this and you're saying, it wasn't that bad. It was as bad as any of those players and worse than any of those coaches had seen or were expecting.
Steve, we talked about it during our podcast. Appreciate you being on our Big Ten Paradigm podcast a couple days ago uploaded. But your thoughts about what is real and what's been left at Northwestern?
Yeah, it was the worst conditions that I can recall for a game in many years. Impossible to throw the ball in that weather, as Tony kind of outlined. And, ordinarily Stroud's passes have a lot of zip on them, and they were kind of holding up in the wind in the air. And Northwestern probably broke up 5 or 6 passes just because there was time for their guys to break on the ball and make plays on the ball that should have been completed. There were 4 or 5 balls that were in the receiver's hands that got dropped, straight drops that should have been completed, including one over the shoulder touchdown to Emeka Buka that, he would have walked into the end zone on that one. That didn't happen. So, people who, want to give Stroud, a bad mark for that game, I don't think they're being realistic. And Ohio State had to win the game left-handed. I think Northwestern, as we watched the game unfold, had a much better plan on both sides of the ball on how to contend with it. I'm not sure if Ohio State considered it to be real or if they just thought they would show up and out-talent the Wind and Northwestern. I don't know, but it didn't look very good from the Ohio State perspective until about the middle of the third quarter. And then I think they started to wear Northwestern down a little bit. And that's where things kind of made a turn for Ohio State.
I said it, Mark. I said it on one of my podcasts that I was on this week about how, to Steve's point, Northwestern did handle it better in terms of the offense. And my thought is that's because Northwestern has fewer options. Ohio State has more options, except those options aren't exactly what you need in that kind of condition. And Ohio State still wants to throw the ball, and they have their receivers. So you try to use them. Northwestern doesn't have that same kind of talent. So they're like, we have this and we can do this. Ohio State has, Ryan Day's like, no, let's try to do this. Let's try to do this. Let's see if we can do this. Northwestern's just like, we don't have that. We're just going to do this. We're going to do the Wildcat, and we're going to throw short. And that was the basis of their offense. And that was about the best attack that you could have for this game. You go to the Wildcat and you outnumber the defense. You throw short to avoid the wind. But Ohio State, they tried to throw downfield some with the wind, against the wind. And it wasn't – and the thing is, the wind didn't just go, if you're watching on TV, right to left. It was also blowing towards the camera. So it was coming at an angle, which you saw – and I charted like all of CJ Stroud's incompletions that weren't drops or broken up. They were affected by the wind blowing it towards the camera. You can see like all of the incompletions drifted towards the camera more than they should have or than they normally would have. So it's just we could talk about the weather and until the cows come home, and they'd be flying in that wind almost with the way it was, but just things you've never seen before. And I think that's you can explain a lot of it away, but still 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, you got to pick those up.
We can nitpick at the defense. They didn't look like they were there maybe from the opening snap. They got taken to school methodically on that one scoring drive. But other than that, I think it's nitpicking. We'll obviously address the defense. But at the same time, everything's directed toward this running game. And so, Tony, I'm going to throw 2 theories at you that I threw at Steve the other day. They couldn't run the ball that effectively. And it's more so 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, over and over and over, failed attempts there. Then the scoring play to get them on the board was Emeka Ibuka in some type of exotic end around. And I thought right there, are they going to utilize other players in the running game more in the next few weeks, leading into and against Michigan, number 1. And then number 2, that 4th and 1 where CJ Stroud pulls it, and to everyone's surprise, he's in the clear. And then later in the game, they designed a run for him. And I thought, was Ryan Day waiting for Michigan? Was he waiting for the Michigan game, but he got to this point and thought, let's win this game? Or was he thinking, I'm going to pull this out a couple of weeks before Michigan and give them something else to prepare for to tie up more practice time for them?
Well, I think they would rather have not done that because, as Ryan Day said, this was a break glass in case of emergency running CJ Stroud. And they get into this game, and Jim Knowles said it, Ryan Day said it, you win it any way you can. It doesn't matter what it takes or what you show or the any secrets that you give up. You just want to win the game. But in terms of Emeka, yeah, they've been doing the jet motion quite a bit this year. And I think, especially these last few weeks, that does open things up. And I think that you will continue to see that because they want to spread the field east and west, north and south. Those jet sweeps allow them to do the east-west stuff. Plus, you're giving some pretty good athletes the ball, and they are hurt at running back. Like, even their top two walk-ons are out right now to tell you how thin they are at running back. So the more you can get Emeka the ball, we've seen Marvin Harrison run it a couple of times. You see Julian Fleming maybe get in there as well as Xavier Johnson. So you have to find ways to move the ball on the ground. And even when you don't give that jet sweep guy the ball, you just use him as a motion, as a decoy. That still slows the defense a bit. It allows for some play action off of that, where Emeka runs behind CJ Stroud, and so the defense loses the ball for a minute. And they've pulled that before, where the defense loses the ball and it turns into a play action, and so it constrains the defense a bit, which helps the running game. So I think you'll see more of that. CJ running the ball, that was a matter of the Northwestern just had more guys in the box that they could block. So you have to equate numbers, and you have the quarterback run to do that. And they tried to do it without it, and they've tried to do it without it for most of the year. And now I think you're going to see it come into play the rest of the season. And I think that was the plan all along. If they weren't able to run the ball like they wanted, their normal 6-7 yards per carry, at some point you need to win. And we saw this with JT Barrett. You see it with any time you have these quarterbacks that can run, and CJ Stroud can run, when the talent is equated, when you're playing the better teams, the quarterback is going to take off. There's no reason for CJ Stroud to run against Toledo when they're up by 4 touchdowns at any point in the game. There's no reason for him to run against Indiana. There's no reason for him to take those risks. And they don't want him to take those risks because they need him healthy in December and January, which Justin Fields never was. And you see the results of Justin Fields getting hit and taking those shots. And, they'd like to avoid that if possible.
Leave those comments and questions in the live chat. We're here for another 45 minutes talking Buckeyes. Please join Tony at Buckeye Huddle and his podcast, Buckeye Weekly. You see the banner with his Twitter handle, so join him right there. Steve as well, 247 Sports Bucknuts. We appreciate Steve posting these live discussions each and every week. Get back here next Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Going through, so offensive line options. Are there any? Are there many? What do you think?
Listening to Coach Day talk yesterday, they believe, excuse me, they're playing the best 5 offensive linemen that they have, and they're not inclined to make any changes. I think a lot of people look at Matthew Jones at guard as a bit of a liability right now, that he hasn't played maybe up to his capability. Honestly, people tell me they think Luke Whippler at center's played pretty well. Donovan Jackson has been okay, I think, at guard. DeJuan Jones at times, I don't know if he gets bored with it or it just, I don't know, just once in a while he just doesn't finish a block or doesn't make the play that he needs to make. But and even Paris Johnson's had a couple missed assignments at times. So I think I just covered all 5 of them there. They're not inclined to put Josh Fryer in the game other than as the 6th lineman. You'll see him out there wearing number 41. Somebody on the staff must have had an affinity for Tom Seaver, because that's the number that they've given. That 6th lineman is number 41. He comes as an extra tight end, and that's the number that Donovan Jackson wore last year when he had that role, and now Josh Fryer wears it this year when he wears that plays that role. Enoch Vamahi, his name came up in yesterday's press conference, and Coach Day says, yeah, he's out there practicing every day, but we think we're playing the top 5. So, that's the end of that discussion. Basically, he wasn't having it. So that's kind of where they're at right now on that. So I guess I'm open to suggestion, but doesn't sound like they are.
Yeah, Tony, anything additional on offensive line options?
Steve's exactly right. Ryan Day was asked directly about that, and they're steadfast that they've got their best five. It almost feels a little bit like the Dallin Hayden thing with the running game on Saturday. Like, why not just try something different? And that's always the peanut gallery, us over here. Like, well, just do something different. The coaches are the ones who are in practice, and it's like doing something different doesn't necessarily mean something is better. But I do remember Jim Tressel ironically saying, if it's not broke, break it. And that the one guy who never broke anything, would say something like that. Sometimes you just have to change some things up. But maybe what you do instead of replacing those guys is call the plays that suit them best. Don't ask Matt Jones to go run an 8 yards to try and catch a linebacker or catch somebody else on the other side of the line, because he can't do it right now. If you just let him go get somebody right across from him, which is something he's always done well, that's probably a better option for him. Just, I think, use these guys the way they are better utilized, and don't ask too much of them. And, although you see sometimes Donovan Jackson gets stood up and thrown back when he's going right against somebody across from him. So it's like the right side maybe has a different skill set than the left side, but you have to try to get them to work in unison and the way you are calling a run play. And so I think there's still clearly some issues there individually. And, one of the things Ryan Day said is like, well, it's a line. So if you got like one weak spot, you can generally get away with it. Now, others will tell you if it's an offensive line and there's one weak link in a chain, it's going to collapse. And both cases can be true as long as you're not running and counting on that one weak link to be the lead guy or to to keep the backside guy getting off of you. But I think you just have to call the plays better and run the better schemes and plays that suit what you have better. If those are your five best, put them in the best situation to succeed.
Some people would say that Indiana and even Maryland are not a barometer at all. We will know nothing until they line up against Michigan. However, Indiana keeps losing football games, but they don't get blown off the field in the first quarter. They tend to hang in games. Michigan on down the line. Even this last game against Penn State wound up 31 points, but it was tacking on an extra touchdown kind of until the dam broke sometime in the second half. So Indiana is going to be some level of barometer as in terms of effectiveness on the ground. I haven't looked up their numbers on their rushing defense, but that's going to be what everybody's watching this week.
Yeah, good point. Indiana, obviously, last week was hamstrung because Connor Bazelak was in street clothes, the starting quarterback. Jack Tuttle filled in for him. Then he got knocked out, I think, in the third quarter, and they had a true freshman finish the game. Tom Allen, their coach, has come out and said that Bazelak should be back for the game this week against Ohio State, but it's some astronomical spread number, I think, again, for Ohio State, maybe even as much as 40 points. I haven't even looked at it, but to me, that seems a little bit outlandish. But if Ohio State's hitting on all cylinders and can throw the football and get back to running it with, some decent efficiency, which 3 weeks in a row they really haven't, then maybe they're able to cover that kind of a number. And if Indiana's offense can't generate, then so be it. But Indiana opened the season with a win over Illinois, a team that's now 7-2. But, Tom Allen, I think's got to be on a little bit of the hot seat. You and I talked about it on the Big Ten podcast the other day, Mark, that 1-14 in Indiana's last 15 Big Ten games, 0-9 last year, and then 1-5, I think, this year. So, and it's not getting better; it's getting worse. I mean, that was the worst one was the last one to Penn State. So, which understandable with the quarterback issues, they weren't going to move the football. But Penn State did a great job moving it against Indiana in that game. So they have to win out. I'm not sure who they play next week. I know they end up with Purdue. They need to win all 3 games just to get to 6-6, and they're certainly not going to beat Ohio State in Ohio Stadium. That hasn't happened since the late 1980s for Indiana. I think Ohio State's won 29 straight games in the series, which is one of the longest win streaks for any Power 5 team against another Power 5 opponent. Might be the longest active one. I don't know. Ohio State hasn't lost a Big Ten home game since 2015, 7 full years. Last one was to Michigan State. The conditions for that Michigan State game in 2015, kind of similar to what we saw at Northwestern, maybe not the 40-mile-an-hour winds, but it was cold and rainy and blowing that day. And there's one more, as I just kind of go on a stream of consciousness here, 1995, the Eddie George game where he had 300 and however many yards against Illinois. It was in the 30s with some blowing sleet that felt like it was burning your eyes as it was hitting you. It was that was an awful day. I can attest to that.
I was in the stands for that one as a sophomore. It was just fine to me. Not that I don't
Did
recall
you have the
too much of it.
working that day?
I don't have a lot of memories of that game other than I think I do remember Eddie George taking off down the side because that's a moment you'll never really forget. In terms of the Indiana defense, it's funny because they're ranked 11th in the Big Ten in rush defense. You're like, oh, blah, they can't stop anybody. But they're 6th in terms of yards per carry. They only give up 3.6 yards per carry. They held Michigan to 4.1 yards per carry. They've done that where teams will just run so much because they're running out the clock, basically, that they'll run for 180 yards, but it takes them 45 carries to do it. And if Ohio State is struggling, averaging 3 or 4 yards a carry against Indiana, people will point to it and be like, see, this is Ohio State, just not back, can't run it yet. And meanwhile, it's like that's what everybody is doing against Indiana right now, because you throw against Indiana early, you get up, you score, and then you run out the clock in the fourth quarter, and Indiana knows you're running, so you're picking up like 3 yards a carry for an entire quarter. But Ohio State still needs, obviously, to establish the run. I do wonder how they're going to want to start fast, but yes, they need to run, but I also think they're probably itching like crazy to get out there and just throw the ball, stretch their legs, throw the ball, stretch their arms in something other than a hurricane. And so even with that Indiana run defense, I think you'll see them continue to use the receivers. I don't know how much you use CJ Stroud. Maybe just do it once a game just to keep defenses aware of it and make them think that it's possible. But I think the Indiana defense it's not as good as it has been in the past, but for some reason, maybe it's a system, maybe it's just the veteran players that they have. They're able to slow teams down. Rutgers is able to do the same thing. And, we saw them hold Michigan in check for a while, and then they can't do it anymore. It's like, Greg Schiano, same thing with Ohio State. You play all of the crazy cards that you have, and then eventually you're out, and then the game starts, and you're done in a quarter and a half.
Yeah, it's a great point about the Indiana rush defense. Tony, you said 6th in the Big Ten. I looked up the national rank yards per play was 31st. That's a respectable number, especially considering, again, the opposition. 2 capable backs, really emerging backs last week in Penn State, and of course the Michigan rushing attack. It's almost needs to be taken into consideration, much like the defensive ranks of Big Ten Western Division teams. They got good defenses over there, but they're obviously all playing each other and those dismal offenses too at the same time. So that's what we have there. Brady with a question about this year's team against the 2020 team. Where do we think those compare?
That's interesting because this year's defense against that Justin Fields offense and the running quarterback, they've had some issues equating and keeping up with the running quarterback, like a quarterback who could run. So that's one side of it. But then that defense, the 2020 defense, has to stop this Ohio State offense. And if you're playing it in the WAC or and I guess it's kind of like Michigan. Where's the game? What are the conditions? And that's who who I'll tell you I'm going to pick in that one. But it would be difficult for the 2020 defense, I think, to keep up with this offense.
Be a nice test for the.
Yeah, I think this team's better than that team. I don't think we ever got the full picture of what that team was going to be all about because guys were in and out all season.
Just like this
COVID,
year.
And they certainly didn't have the entire team when they played Alabama, that they got run off the field, against Alabama. So And you can debate Stroud and Fields all day. Fields was banged up a little bit, I thought, down the stretch in that season, obviously, and maybe not as efficient, maybe not as good, maybe not as athletic as he could have been. And maybe the better comparison's 2019 when they actually had a working defense to a degree, and you had guys like Chase Young and Jeffrey Okudah. But I don't know. I'm
Give me
open.
2019.
What's that?
I'll take 2019 in that one. I think that
Yeah.
that team kind of got screwed by the officials there against Clemson, but also had some red zone issues against Clemson in that game to where they were kicking too many field goals and allowed one play
Yes.
to cost them that game. But
Yes.
I
I don't
think
think they beat LSU because I think Joe Axborough was just beyond. That team was just beyond, and Cookie Monster Orgeron. I think that would have been a hard one to take down, but it would have been a fun game. I think the upshot to that.
I would have loved to have seen that secondary at Ohio State in that pass defense, including Chase Young against Joe Burrow in that passing game. I think it would
Jamar
have been
Chase, yeah,
an epic game in there.
Mm-hmm.
Because say what you will about the officiating and Ohio State blowing the game versus the officiating and how much was the blame there. If you just watch the line of scrimmage against Clemson and then translate to Clemson trying to take on LSU, and that game was still, for as much as it turned out to be a blowout, was 28-25 somewhere around start of the fourth quarter. So It was competitive. And I just got to think, that rushing defense to the previous question, or that rushing offense with Trey Sermon, as hot as he was, and the offensive line blowing up Northwestern and Clemson, that would be interesting against this Ohio State defense. It would have been interesting more so against Alabama. Not that they would have won the game, but man, you're just taking a dynamic runner off the field, and then you're basically putting a fullback in the game to carry your offense or your rushing offense the rest of the game.
Mark, I'll tell you what would have been an interesting game. 2020 Ohio State against a 2020 Michigan, had Michigan not declined to play that game.
And that actually was possible. We're talking fantasy with the rest of them, but that was
fantasy now
on the schedule.
Yeah,
that was actually on the schedule. Well, the two will hook up here very soon, and I don't know if the stakes and the hype and all that could be ratcheted up anymore, but I think it can this year.
It's going to be. Somebody's going to say something they shouldn't, or something is going to happen, and it's because even yesterday with Ryan Day, Michigan was talked about more than Indiana. Northwestern was the number one topic of conversation. Then it was Michigan, then it was Indiana, and it's going to continue to be that way. And honestly, it should.
All right. We will take comments and questions. I hope you folks watching and listening realize what we've got here each and every week with Tony, with Steve, and typically with Kevin Noon. The best. We got them all here at the same time and deliver top-notch Ohio State football talk. This isn't to be taken for granted. I certainly don't. So hope you appreciate it. Like the video. We've got the super chat working as well. So please consider that. All right, we've got college football playoff rankings that came out on Tuesday. So I may have made the comment last week that my eyes were on the loser of Georgia, Tennessee. How far do they fall to set up some type of SEC monopoly on the playoff? Also, the TCU rise to number 4 puts them in somewhat decent position. So we see the Buckeyes maintain 2, even though there was speculation that Michigan would leap them, which would have been completely wrong. Not that Michigan can't be ranked ahead of Ohio State, but if Ohio State's 2 and Michigan's 5, based on beating Rutgers, I would have thought that would have been completely insane. So, Steve, what are your thoughts? I know you're not a big rankings guy, so you like to put this away until the final weekend, but did anything stand out to you?
I thought they did an outstanding job. I thought that this is one of the best set of rankings the committee has ever come up with, and you could hold water on a lot of it, just based on who's played who and who's beaten who. They had the pecking order almost perfect, I thought. I don't know a whole lot beyond 6 or 7. I really wasn't paying a whole lot of attention. And this whole discussion about, well, Notre Dame's now in at number 20 and that helps Ohio State and all that garbage. How much does it really help? I mean, I don't know. If you're worried about splitting hairs between who's number 20 and who's number 35, they're both mediocre. They're really not. If you got 3-4 losses, I mean, it really didn't mean a whole lot to beat you, much more than beating the teams you played that had 5 or 6 losses. So, let's don't split hairs on that. It's kind of like the old Jay Billis thing. I'm really not all that concerned about, some of the minor details. Tell me who you've beaten. Tell me who you can beat, and at the top, and then I'll know whether or not you're legitimate or not. And Ohio State will have that opportunity to prove that when they play Michigan here in a couple of weeks, and Michigan vice versa. Obviously, the SEC situation is going to take care of itself. Georgia figures to backpedal now into the SEC championship with whatever's left on their schedule. I presume Georgia Tech and then LSU, I presume maybe in the championship game. I'm not sure who else they have to play yet. They moved Clemson and Alabama down, maybe not as far maybe as I would have liked it, but because I do give the Pac-12 teams a little bit of credit, maybe more than the committee does, but they have USC up there kind of on name recognition more than what they've really done on the field. To me, I mean, they've played a lot of close games against some crappy teams, and yet they continue to be rewarded for it. So, I mean, I think, wasn't Utah the team that's beaten USC? Is that right? I actually have Utah ahead of USC in my rankings, I think. And
Utah beat UCLA.
Utah beat UCLA. Okay.
No.
Or who beat USC then? Was it Oregon?
Utah beat USC.
Oh, UCLA beat Utah. Sorry.
UCLA beat Utah.
Yeah.
And UCLA beat Utah, and Oregon beat UCLA, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, that's kind of the pecking order I have those in. And yet, by cachet, it seems the committee is awed by the garnet and gold and has them up there, maybe a little higher than I do. But I'm not worried. As I say it every week, I'm not worried about it. It looks like it's all going to come out in the wash. TCU, all they do is win games. I mean, they're probably not favored again this week, against Texas? I haven't looked yet. Texas I was surprised Texas was favored this past week and they pulled that one out. So that could be a heck of a game, Texas and TCU, but it's at Texas, isn't it, this week?
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? So that makes it tougher for TCU. Maybe they have their first loss, and then that puts Tennessee back in at number 4. And obviously Tennessee is coasting to the finish line here. Who do they even have left?
Missouri, South Carolina, and Vanderbilt.
Yeah, so they're going to coast to the finish line 11-1, theoretically. Do they get back in? Does the Ohio State-Michigan loser get back in? A lot of football left to be played, I think.
That's where that Notre Dame game comes in.
But Notre Dame's going to lose to USC unless they go out there and win that game, and then Notre Dame's going to fall out of the top 25, and there went your boost for beating Notre Dame. And I think Notre Dame is the trump card that Ohio State has on Michigan right now. But some of that will be mitigated next week because Illinois at worst will be 7-3 next week when they play. And that will basically cancel that one out because Ohio State's not playing anybody that good as Illinois from the West. So in terms of the top 10 opponents for those two teams, they're identical. Ohio State gets a half a point for playing Toledo at number 11, whereas, Michigan, had to play Colorado State and Hawaii. But, again, if we're worried about what you did in games 10, 11, 12 on your schedule, we're looking too far down the line. It's what you did against the best 6 teams on your schedule.
And one other thing, the committee does not like Michigan's non-conference schedule. That's why they continue to remain 3 behind Ohio State, and I think that will remain the case until those two teams play. This is a Michigan program that bought out of a UCLA series so that they could play like Hawaii this year and East Carolina next year. So the committee doesn't like that, and whether Notre Dame ends up being 7-5 or 9-3, that will help Ohio State against Michigan, but that's all going to be settled. I think what comes down to it then is, as you're jockeying with Tennessee, and the real turd in the punch bowl of all of this is what happens if LSU beats Georgia in the SEC championship game. How do you settle who's going to be in the game then? That in itself is an hour show every day.
Absolutely, Tony. That's where I was headed. LSU.
Doesn't Georgia get the edge over Tennessee?
Yeah, but doesn't Tennessee get an edge over everybody else in the world?
Tennessee destroyed LSU.
Yeah, they lost to Georgia, though.
You want a nightmare scenario. Not only that happens, but Ole Miss runs the table and finishes 11-1. And for as much as nobody wants to see the SEC get 2 teams, let alone 3, let alone 4, and of course they're not putting 4 teams and they're not putting 3 teams, but how do you sort those 3 out? And then Ole Miss, you put them into the mix.
Yeah, Ole Miss has Alabama this week at home, then they're at Arkansas, then they're at Mississippi State. You know, I could see 0-3, I could see 3-0, and anywhere in between for Ole Miss in there. And they have the one loss to LSU. So LSU has that tiebreaker. No, LSU has a tiebreaker over pretty much everybody at this point, right?
Yeah, LSU's going to the championship game if they win out. Yep. Yeah,
and maybe not even if maybe even with one loss they might.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I know I've heard a lot of people talking about the 2016 situation with Penn State winning the Big Ten but not going to the playoffs, and comparing that with Tennessee and LSU. But the difference there is that was the Penn State wins on a blocked field goal. They also lost they lost a bad game at some point in the season. LSU's losses, I think, the losing to Florida State at the start of the season, you saw Florida State sneak into the rankings, which is pretty comical and very purposeful to make LSU's loss look better. But I don't think it's a good comparison for 2016 to this year, because Tennessee's win over LSU was by a lot, and but it's just going to be very bad for everybody if LSU makes it and beats Georgia, because do you keep Georgia out at that point? Like, Georgia's already in. So I don't know what they would do, and I don't know how they would manufacture and come up with their whatever they want. If Ohio State or Michigan is undefeated, they're in. If TCU is undefeated, they're in. I think TCU loses this weekend, but like, I'm not convinced you wouldn't see 3 SEC teams in there just because they don't know who to leave out. So it's like, well, who do you leave out?
I don't know. I truly don't think Ole Miss is going to the possibility or probability of them running those 3 is pretty minuscule. But it's certainly if they win this week, then I'm taking that line off the record. But I listed 10 teams that have a shot with 1 loss, and I know it's to varying degrees, and I'm not going to go through all that. But you can even dive into Clemson and North Carolina, obviously the 3 in the Pac-12 as well.
I don't think Clemson or North Carolina are out yet. I do know Dabo was not happy about Clemson falling all the way to 10, citing their win over Florida State and LSU's loss to Florida State, and also LSU having 2 losses and Clemson only having 1. But Clemson is ugly and nobody wants to watch them right now. Nobody wants to see them in the playoffs, anywhere near the playoffs. So it's like the committee is just putting them in the closet. Don't want to see them, don't want to hear from them, and let's not talk about them.
They were down 28-0. I mean, they can redeem themselves if they roll through the remaining games and beat a 1-loss North Carolina team. I presume is that who they would play in the championship game?
Yes.
Yeah.
But North Carolina's schedule even is so backloaded. Like, I'm I went through and I got the 10-team list and who they beat and their total record. North Carolina's resume is awful.
Mhm.
Their best win is Duke, then Pitt 5-4, but they're backloaded with Wake, NC State, and then a championship game.
It's a gauntlet, that's for sure. Because those are going to be tough, hard hitting games that go into the fourth quarter, all three of them. There's not any of those where you'd say, oh, yeah, they're a 2-touchdown, no problem. As we're talking about some of these teams having to play Missouri and Vanderbilt, those, and, South Carolina could give whoever Tennessee maybe a half a game. I don't know.
Yeah.
Depends on if they show up.
Well, South Carolina also has Clemson, so they could knock a couple of prospective one-loss teams out of the playoff picture this year.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun.
I think UCLA has a certain path. They've got a certain argument. If they avenge the loss to Oregon in the championship game, then they will have beaten everybody on their schedule. But they're the Michigan of the Pac-12 with the non-conference that is abysmal.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't play anyone. Oregon's really backloaded. They're, for as much as I've been impressed with Oregon, they're pretty thin, Steve, just like USC, to your point, are paper thin. Oregon State's their best win. Washington State's their second best win. USC's done nothing to date, but they come down the stretch with UCLA, Notre Dame, and Oregon/Utah, their final three. That's a gauntlet.
Yeah, that can get a little dicey for them. I want to see them prove it. And those are the three best teams on their schedule probably down the stretch here. So I want to see them prove it. I mean, other than Utah, I suppose, but I want to see them go out on the field and prove it. We're in for some good games here the next 3 weeks. That's for sure. Whether it's, not necessarily, I think, Ohio State, Indiana, the Buckeyes just all this talk about where they fit in the rankings and all these other things, it's put up or shut up time. It's time to go out and play your best game of football each Saturday, because this is the last really bad team you're going to play. I mean, after this, it's all teams with winning records. And after the Maryland game, it's all top 10 teams. I mean, it's all top 5 teams. So, the championship game with Illinois could be a top 15 team, but if that's who it is. But, so much out there that, this is the last dress rehearsal, so to speak, because if you go out to Maryland and screw around and, your defense isn't tuned in on what their offense is doing, that could be a shootout that gets into the fourth quarter. But, I don't feel like there's a lot of danger with that game. They played terrible at Wisconsin, although probably the same conditions or similar conditions to what we saw in Chicago with Northwestern. But, neither quarterback in that Wisconsin-Maryland game did much of anything.
Somebody threw the scenario at me, in addition to all the SEC mess, that if Ohio State slips up against Maryland, then beats Michigan and wins the Big Ten championship.
Well, if Ohio State wins on Saturday, then regardless of what happens against Maryland, the Michigan game is for the East championship. So they will have secured their spot in the Big Ten East championship game against Michigan, November 26th or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Tony, if you've done the gymnastics on the Big Ten Western Division, I'm
God.
waiting a week and then saying, okay, I got to see these games this week. And then I'll start to try to figure out all the scenarios.
We need that guy to do that chart, the color-coded chart with all the permutations is what we need, because we have 3 weeks worth of games here. It'll be a much easier chart to do after this weekend's games, I think. But isn't it Illinois has a 1-game lead on 4 teams who are tied at 3-3,
Mm-hmm.
and then Northwestern and Nebraska are completely out of it. But
are they? Is Nebraska out of it? They're at 2-4. They're only like 2 games, but they've probably lost a tiebreaker to everybody.
2 down with 3 to go. I think that'd be a hard one to overcome. I don't know, but
yeah, it's too early for the Big Ten West, because was anybody expecting Illinois to lose to Michigan State last week? I wasn't. And so you see something like that happen, you're like, well, Illinois can lose to anybody, and they could finish the year losing to Northwestern. I'm not even sure where that game is at, but I need more information before I can even start to parse this. And will we all be surprised when Wisconsin rises from the dead to play Ohio State or Michigan in the Big Ten championship? No. Or Iowa.
Jim Leonard
Purdue,
for president.
yeah. Hey, if Iowa somehow makes it to the Big Ten championship game, you got to think Kirk Ferentz there is a pretty good candidate for Big Ten Coach of the Year.
See, we told you we had it all the way. Good
That's
God.
exactly.
Do they have a Big Ten Coordinator of the Year?
Not in Iowa. Yes,
that Brian could possibly sneak in the back door based on back-to-back division championship offenses.
That's funny.
Yeah, Iowa and Wisconsin rise from the ashes, and they play a huge game this weekend. And Illinois owns the tiebreaker against each one of them if it's head-to-head. So they really need Purdue to win that, because even if it's a loss the next week by Illinois to Michigan, that only brings them into a tie, and they would lose that tiebreaker, the winner of the Iowa-Wisconsin game. But they need Purdue to win this weekend.
Yeah.
And I found putting any faith in Purdue at any point this year is stupid, because every time I've done it, it's totally backfired. So I'm not even going to pretend to know. Like, of course, Illinois should win this. It's at home. It's against Purdue. But, I don't know. It's the Big Ten West. How can you, Mark, I know we all do our picks. I don't know what the record about the Big Ten West is for anybody this year. That's something separate you should try to figure out.
Yes, if any of us are over 30%, then we should pat ourselves on the back. I once thought Purdue was a good football team. They're not. I don't think they are now. All right. Appreciate everybody being here for Buckeyes Live here at the Voice of College Football. We're here every Wednesday. Let's find out what Tony's been up to, what you got available.
What have I been up to? Basketball and football, same as Steve. It's that time of year, but have been just dropped a podcast live stream from last night during covering the rankings and then what was said on the teleconference afterwards. So you can find that on all of your podcast platforms of choice. This week, there's still stuff to be written about the Northwestern game, but it's already so late in the week that I don't even know if I'm going to get to it. But it's just such an unusual environment that people had to play in. I still think there's stuff to be done from that one as we move forward to Indiana. But they're still also going to be focused on Michigan coming up as well. And I think from this point on, it's almost just these are the opening acts for the Michigan game at this point.
Steve.
Yeah, a lot of the same with Tony. Just more Ohio State sports stuff going on than we can keep track of right now, with 2 basketball games a week and a football game, and noon start this week. We'll wait to find out what time the game next Saturday at Maryland will be. Probably after this week's games. We know you'll find it on Channel 6 on ABC in Columbus. We just don't know if it's at noon or 3:30 that Maryland game, but. Whatever, we're just going to keep plowing ahead each day. That's all we can do. We've got basketball interviews and football interviews today, and man, it never stops. So we'll be there tonight, sharing all the wit and wisdom from the Ohio State players. As this Indiana week, it's Military Appreciation Week at the stadium this week. I'm sure they'll have some nice recognition for our people in the armed services, and that's it. Just counting. I can't believe 9 games are down and only 3 games are left in the regular season. It's we are hurtling to the triumphant conclusion of the 2022 college football season at the speed of light. It seems like.
Yeah, Mark, you ask what's going on, and it's just like, I don't know what is today. What is the day?
I don't know what day it is. Yeah, it's like
coming back from a road trip to straight to basketball. It's been a time. So I don't even know what I have. I would have to look at my calendar, and right now I'm not in the mood.
Yeah, I need to go take a nap.
Well,
that's what Kevin's doing right now.
I'm not going to get. So there you go.
A nap right now. To Tony's point, I've got so many content ideas. I can't get
Mhm.
to all of them. By
That's
the time I do, it's like Friday, and it's
it's
like nobody cares
frustrating.
about that now.
Mhm.
It is frustrating because I kind of on this conveyor belt with all these team channels, but I have more somewhat creative ideas to do. I'm going to hit you guys with this before we hit the road. People are always interested in recruiting. Is there anything out there on the recruiting front of note?
You've got a Philadelphia receiver, Tyseer Denmark from 2024, who is one of Ohio State's top receiver targets. He is committing. He's choosing his school, I believe, in November 24th or so. Exciting, talented prospect, and the Buckeyes look to be in very good position there. I know everybody's waiting for five-star defensive ends like Damon Wilson to figure out what he's going to do. The Ohio State is trying to get him back for the Michigan game, and they're trying to get a bunch of people in for the Michigan game to just get that last bit of, here you go. This is what it looks like before December signing day. So they're focused on the defensive end stuff. I saw somebody asking about offensive line. Offhand, I don't know of anybody that is necessarily on the radar coming in, but this is not a good week to ask me because of basketball and everything else going on. But yeah, just trying to get some guys back in for that Michigan game, get them scheduled here, and have that be another big weekend. And when you've got that as a big weekend, you better show up. And then if you lose, you turn that around, you try to spin it and say, "Hey, that's why we need you. Did you see this? You could have been playing. That's why we need you. It's unfortunate, but you can help change this."
Your toe is always tapping, as Mike Damone said in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. You're always be selling. So
Always be recruiting.
yeah, I agree with everything Tony said. I think Keon Keeley is a big time defensive end who they are really trying to push, and Damon Wilson as well. And Mateo Uiagalelei, he was out at Notre Dame to watch his brother's Clemson team play there. So we'll see if Notre Dame can make some inroads with him. But if Ohio State can land one or two of those guys, that would be huge. And obviously the play of JT Tuimoloau last week should go a long way toward helping Ohio State land one of those talented defensive ends, because that's how you can be spotlighted in Ohio State's defensive scheme, certainly by making big plays. And obviously that's individual effort and God-given ability that kid was born with to be able to make some of those plays that he made in that Penn State game. But need to see more of that this week against Indiana. Get after Connor Bazelak and the Hoosiers and get them out of there quick. They have not started well the last 3 weeks. They had turnovers. Clifford threw the interceptions the first two possessions. The Penn State game, I think Ohio State only led 10-0, I think, or something like that. Maybe it was 7-0. I don't know, but didn't capitalize as fully on Penn State's early game mistakes. And then lo and behold, it becomes a 4-quarter game. So don't want to see that. Obviously against Iowa, settling for field goals. Obviously against Northwestern, they didn't score a touchdown until their 7th possession of the game. So you'd have to look back a long way to find a Ryan Day team that didn't score until the 7th possession of the game. I don't know if it's even happened previously at Ohio State with this current run. And they set a new FBS record with their 70th straight 20-point game on offense, but they didn't get that 20th point until about midway, 5 minutes to go in the game. This was, as I said, this was probably the toughest to get the 20 points as any of these 70 games Ohio State has done it. And it's kind of remarkable that is a major college record, 70 straight games with 20 points or more. But such is the run this Ohio State offense has been on the last 5-6 years.
And that last touchdown was the only point scored against the wind.
Unbelievable.
Yes. Todd Blackledge told a story about he and Marino on the field in a Penn State game where all 29 points were scored with the wind. Tony, is Michigan playing better football than Ohio State right now?
Which half? Because they were down 17-14 at the half against Rutgers, and then they scored, 38 points in the second half. You look at in Big Ten play, their average score at halftime is 14-10. Michigan leading 14-10 over Indiana, Penn State, all Iowa, Ohio State's average score at halftime is like 23-10, and I think Ohio State's average score second half might be a little bit lower as you do the math there. But Michigan's still playing into the fourth quarter a lot of these games, where Ohio State isn't necessarily playing into the fourth quarter when you're already leading by 42 points in the third quarter. But is Michigan playing better than Ohio State right now? At times, and Michigan takes advantage of turnovers. Rutgers threw 2 interceptions really quick in that third quarter to basically, actually three interceptions, I think, in the third quarter that turned into a quick 21 points for Michigan. So if you don't give them something, they're not as good. And, Ohio State ran the ball better than Michigan did against Rutgers, if you're looking for other comparisons. But it's a lot of words to say, yeah, Michigan's probably playing better than Ohio State at times, but Ohio State's also playing better than Michigan at times. If there's only one way, there's only some way we could just get them on the field together to figure it out.
To settle it. They've had 4 common opponents. Of the other 5 opponents, I believe Michigan's 5 other opponents have 18 combined wins, and Ohio State's 5 other opponents have 20 combined wins. So the difference in schedule, at least in terms of wins, and I'm giving Michigan credit for UConn, which is 5-5, playing an independent schedule. If you had UConn over 4 wins before the season, bully for you, because I don't think anybody thought that they were going to do much of anything. They beat Boston College, which, so be it, doesn't mean a whole lot this year. But, again, we're splitting hairs if that's what we're worried about. As you guys have said, the neat thing is they're going to settle this one on the field. So there you go.
Michigan's run defense has been fantastic all year long, and they've held 6 of their opponents under 100 yards rushing. So Ohio State's going to need to do something there. But even if they can't run the ball as much as they'd like, they can still throw it. And they threw the ball really well against Michigan last year, but it resulted in a 15-point loss. But this is also a different Ohio State defense, so we'll see.
It sure is. For Tony Gerdeman on Buckeye Huddle and his podcast Buckeye Weekly, and also Steve Hellwagon, Bucknuts 247 Sports. Guys, thanks so much. We appreciate it. Enjoy the game this weekend.
Will do.
All right. Take care.